Hey guys, it's Jane here, and today I'm going to talk about my book, Wedding the Widow. And this book is about Charlotte, and she is pregnant and going west with her husband. And on the way, her husband dies. And so she doesn't want to continue going west by herself. She doesn't feel like she has the resources to start a new life in the Wild West. Not the Wild West like the Cowboy West, but the Wild West like, the West Coast, Seattle, Washington, the logging communities, that far west. So she's decided that she's going to just stay in the town where her husband had died in. And she asks the local leader of the church there if there's anybody in his congregation who could use a wife. Because, this is back in the day when women primarily did a lot of things around the house. They were very useful to have because they're cooking the meals, doing the laundry, keeping the house clean, and the men were generally working. And the Reverend Clint, he connects her with Augustus. Now, Augustus is a gentleman who is an amputee. He is missing his leg after an accident. He's a carpenter, and it was a carpentry accident. And him and Charlotte, connect. And he's really hesitant to fall in love because a woman had broken up with him because of his amputation previously. And, her marriage, we find out, wasn't very good. Her husband had been abusive, and he just wasn't a very good guy. So slowly, she learns to love Augustus, and Augustus learns to love her. And, of course, it's a romance, so everybody lives happily ever after. So with these, I don't just want to tell you what my books are about, but I want to tell you kind of the journey of how I got there and the problems with each book. This was my third book, and probably the one I learned the most from at that point. At that point in my writing, my first two books were great and I learned a lot, but this was probably the one that I really, really stretched to learn a lot about, and it was a rough road. So I started writing it. I was actually in college when I started, and I have very distinct memories of this, of like taking notes for this book in my classes. So I'd go to class and the teacher would be up talking, and I'd be like, "Yeah, I kind of read the book in class, the book last night in class, and then my studying. I think I'll write my novel instead." So I was doing this while I was in college, and I'd been inspired by a lot of stories, particularly mail order bride type stories. I had a lot of inspiration from, there's a book by Jeanette Oke called Love Comes Softly that has a very similar plot in the basics of, a woman's husband dies, she ends up in this town, and, she marries a man there. In her case, in Jeanette Oke's book's case, the man has children, and so the woman, becomes the mother to his children, and that's kind of the trade-off, is she's pregnant, she needs a husband, and he has children, he needs a wife, and so that worked, and there was a little bit more give and take in that relationship. But I love the idea, and I, of course, I've read several other books with that plot, and that was kind of what got me started on my journey for my story, is, oh, that's a brilliant idea, but, I loved her series, but it really wasn't what I was trying to write. Now, some of the challenges I had with this book is, firstly, my character, Augustus, is very religious, but I didn't want to write a religious romance because I knew with him, with one of the big plots being about his leg, I would need to have them actually have sex and on stage. And of course, you can't do that in a religious romance. So it was kind of a challenge, and I wanted to bring out that religiousness in him, but also to have a bedroom scene. And that's something that was really hard to do in this book. And I think if I were going back, I would have taken out that part of him as a character, or done a book that didn't have the sex in it. Because that was, I think I really alienated part of my audience, because a lot of people who are reading romances that have steamier scenes aren't wanting to read about religious characters. The other thing that I did very wrong with this book is I have a second couple in it. Sophie and Ezra. And you'll see me hesitating about the names. one of the challenges I had in this book is everybody got renamed. I sent the book to my beta readers and they hated the names I'd chosen because they sounded too modern. So I ended up renaming almost everybody in the book. And I have to really think about it because, like, in my very first draft, Charlotte was Katie, Kady. And the guy, Augustus, was Angelus. And then they became Cadence and Angel. And those just sounded too modern for historical, and so they got renamed. My very first version, Sophie, was Suzanne, and I ended up changing it to Sophie. And Ezra, I think his name was Jackson. He got changed a lot earlier than everybody else. But anyway, the characters in the book, they had different names. And so, like, trying to remember names is crazy. And that was changed in, like, the very first draft before publication type thing. So it was crazy. But that beta readers are great. And that was one of the comments I have is if you're a new writer, use beta readers. And if they tell you, hey, this doesn't work for me, really consider what they're saying. Would it have made my book better to have, kind of crazy names? Probably not. Does it matter? If I went through and I looked at what names were popular at the time, and Augustus was a popular name on the censuses. So I chose, I kept the same first letter to make it easier in my mind. But if you need to change characters because your beta reader says, hey, this character, there's a reason for it, at least consider it. Now, on the other hand, I didn't do that recently in my book, The Alpha's Niece. I had a lot of beta readers who didn't like the main characters' names, but because I'd chosen them for a real specific reason, I wouldn't change them. But if you don't care that much and people say change your characters' names, especially in a historical, think about it. The other thing that was kind of an adventure with this book and a challenge is this was the first book I hired an editor for. And my first two books had been edited by a friend who was in English, who had a degree in English. She wasn't working like as a teacher or anything, but she had a degree in English. And I think she's gone on to get a degree in library science, but don't quote me. Her and I kind of lost contact. We were both working at the same place, and then I moved on. But so they were edited by her, and that's one of the reasons I didn't have her edit this one is because, at that point we kind of parted company. She was doing her thing and I was doing mine, and she was busy. She was going back to college. So I paid an editor, and it was an editor I found on Fiverr. Now, many of you know I work on Fiverr. I love Fiverr, but you have to be so careful on Fiverr because anybody can work there. Anybody can post their stuff, and you don't always know whether the person really knows anything or not. So I found somebody on Fiverr who had really good ratings and, a cost I could afford, and I hired her. And it was a complete disaster. She sent the story back, and again, I was young, naive. It was my third book. And, the girl who'd edited it before was an English major, but this girl, I paid her, so she must be good, and she had great reviews, so she must be really good. So I started making the changes she suggested, even though I kind of was like, I didn't think that was how that worked. And I didn't think, because again, newbie, I didn't know anything. I didn't think to Google it and see if she was right or if what I thought was right was right. I just assumed she knew more than I did. So I went through and made all the changes that she suggested, and I published. And immediately I was getting negative reviews about the editing. This book needs edited. And I was like, oh my gosh, I paid for editing. I paid for it. Hundreds of dollars got paid for editing this book, and it's a mess. So I went back, I pulled it off, I pulled it down, and this is one great thing about indie publishing, you can redo it. So I pulled it down, I fixed the edits, I put it up as a second edition, although all the original edits are still, or reviews are still on it saying, hey, this is problematic with the grammar and punctuation. So I fixed all that and put it back up. And, I learned a couple of valuable things. Number one is, while I think it's great, it is important to have people, beta readers and critique partners and editors. Not every editor is going to give you a great experience. Some editors don't know. Some editors, I don't think it was malicious. I think she was doing the best she could, but I don't know if it was because she was from a different country. I realized this, she was Canadian, I believe. And so I don't know if their punctuation and grammar is just a little different or what, but whatever it was a complete disaster on my books. And I really learned a lot about, if you're going to pay somebody to do a service for you, vet them and make sure that they know what they're talking about, even if they have great reviews, even if they're recommended by other people. If you're not sure of something an editor says, Google it. Google is your friend. If you are not sure, if they're like, oh, it's this word, and you're like, I really think it's that one, Google it and check. Don't just be like, oh, that person's an expert. Clearly they know. I'm paying them. They must know. Really make sure you vet people. Also, there are lots of places to find good editors, and you can find good ones on Fiverr. I'm not saying you can't, but just be aware, you're probably going to get what you pay for to a certain degree. And I was young, I didn't have a lot of money to spend on an edit, and most of the time, now looking at this, now my edits now I trade with another writer, so we don't have an editor intervene for reasons I'll talk about later, but a regular editor, we just trade. But if you are doing an edit, an edit of a book this size is probably going to be $500 to $1,000. And I only paid like $200 or $300 for it. I didn't pay all the way that I would have. But it was my first book that I had edited, and it was a crazy editing experience. And just, be careful who you hire and make sure that the advice they're telling you to follow makes sense to you and is realistic, because there are a lot of people out there who are, I think, purposely scamming writers, but there are also a lot of people who think they know stuff, but then it turns out that they really don't. They're new, they're trying, maybe what they learned in high school English isn't really translating well to this. Maybe there are people who are really desperate for money. There are a lot of people who can say, I'm an editor, and you just don't know. And in the indie world, that is something you're going to find a ton. If you are self-publishing, you're going to find a lot of people who are very happy to take your money, and they may not know very much, and they may not know your services. So background check everybody, and if something doesn't sound right, try to get more information. Ask on forums if people have used them, ask for, references, but don't part with your money to people unless you're really sure they're going to do the job you paid them for, because there's nothing more frustrating than having paid hundreds of dollars to an editor and having to go back and fix the mistakes that they created, like that I didn't even have in the original book. There was probably like a few mistakes that she caught that were actual mistakes, but I ended up having to go back and re-edit her stuff, and it was just a disaster. So that was the lesson learned for this book. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not against editors. I think especially new writers really need editors. They need developmental editors, they need regular editors, but just be careful who you hire. All right, guys, I would love to hear about your experiences with, editors. Have you had good ones? Have you had bad ones? Do you have recommendations, the best editors you've ever worked with? If you've enjoyed the video, like it, and if you want more content, subscribe. All right, guys, thanks, bye.